What if I told you that one single moment of love, or perhaps lust, shattered centuries of Targaryen rule, plunging Westeros into one of the bloodiest wars in its history? This is the story of Robert's Rebellion, a war that forever changed the Seven Kingdoms and ended nearly 300 years of Targaryen rule. Stay with us as we uncover the betrayals, the battles, and the bloody price of freedom in the realm of ice and fire. Welcome back, historians of Westeros. If you love diving deep into the great conflicts and legends of the past, you've come to the right place. Today, we journey into the rebellion that toppled the mighty Targaryens, the dynasty of dragons, and set the stage for the world of Game of Thrones. This is not just a tale of kings and armies, but of honor, love, vengeance, and the fate of an entire continent. So gather close and let's begin. The spark that lit the rebellion, the calm before the storm. For nearly 3 centuries, the Targaryens had ruled Westeros. Since Aegon the Conqueror landed with his dragons and bent the great lords of the Seven Kingdoms to his will, no one had seriously challenged their throne. Even when the dragons themselves died out, the name Targaryen was enough to command obedience and fear. But by the reign of King Aerys II Targaryen, remembered forever as the Mad King, cracks had begun to spread through the realm. Aerys had once been a promising ruler, handsome, ambitious, eager to leave his mark upon history. Yet the passage of years twisted him into something else. Paranoia consumed him. Cruelty became his language. He saw treachery everywhere, even among his closest counselors. And his obsession with fire, the cleansing power of flame, would drive him to acts of unspeakable horror. At first, the realm endured his madness. Lords still paid their homage, armies still melt, but whispers spread. And in Westeros, whispers have a way of turning into storms. The great tourney at Harrenhal. The spark that would ignite the rebellion began at a seemingly joyous occasion. The great tourney held at Harrenhal in the year 281 after Aegon's conquest. It was the grandest tourney Westeros had ever seen. Lords and ladies from across the Seven Kingdoms gathered at the ruined castle of Harrenhal, a place whose blackened towers still bore the scars of Aegon's dragonfire. For 10 days, the finest knights in the realm would joust, feast, and display their valor before the eyes of thousands. Among those in attendance were Lord Rickard Stark of Winterfell, his sons Brandon and Eddard, and his daughter Lyanna, a young woman of fierce will and beauty. From the Vale came young Robert Baratheon, fostered alongside Eddard at the Eyrie under Lord Jon Arryn. Robert, already a towering man with a booming laugh, was betrothed to Lyanna Stark. Their union was meant to bind House Baratheon and House Stark in alliance. Also present was Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne, and a man unlike his father in every way. Rhaegar was tall, silver-haired, and melancholy, with a love for music and poetry. Yet beneath that gentle exterior lay a warrior's heart, skilled in arms and commanding on the battlefield. To the people, Rhaegar was the hope of the realm, the one who might save Westeros from the madness of his father. The jousts were fierce, and knights fell one by one. In the end, Prince Rhaegar himself entered the lists. Against all odds, he unhorsed the mighty Ser Barristan Selmy and the feared Ser Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. Rhaegar rode to victory, crowned champion of the tourney. Tradition demanded that the champion name a queen of love and beauty, a lady to receive the victor as crown of blue roses. The court expected Rhaegar to crown his wife, Princess Elia Martell of Dorne. But in a moment that shocked the realm, Rhaegar rode past Elia and placed the crown instead upon the lap of Lyanna Stark. Gasps filled the air. Murmurs spread like wildfire. For in that single act, the prince had dishonored his wife and insulted House Martell. Worse, he had cast doubt upon the betrothal between Robert Baratheon and Lyanna Stark. Some whispered it was love at first sight. Others claimed darker motives, that Rhaegar's obsession with prophecy drove him to seek a union that might birth the prince who was promised. Whatever the truth, the die was cast. The abduction of Lyanna. Months later, Lyanna vanished. Some said she was kidnapped by Rhaegar, carried off against her will. Others believed she went willingly, choosing passion over duty. To Robert Baratheon, it mattered little. To him, Lyanna was stolen, his betrothed, his love, torn from his arms by the silver-haired prince. When word reached Winterfell, her brother Brandon Stark rode south in fury. Accompanied by companions, he galloped to King's Landing and demanded that Prince Rhaegar come forth and return Lyanna. But Brandon's words fell upon the ears of King Aerys, and the Mad King heard treason. Aerys ordered Brandon and his men seized. He demanded their fathers come to court to answer for their son's insolence. Lord Rickard Stark obeyed, riding south in the name of honor. Yet there was no justice waiting in the Red Keep, only fire and death. In the throne room, Aerys accused Rickard Stark of treason. When Rickard demanded a trial by combat, the king granted his wish, but in the most twisted fashion imaginable. Rickard was suspended from the rafters, bound in chains, a fire set beneath him. As he burned alive, Brandon was strangled in a cruel device, forced to watch his father die as he struggled for breath. The deaths of Rickard and Brandon Stark sent shockwaves across the realm. In the Vale, Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark burned with rage. In the Eyrie, their foster father, Jon Arryn, faced the Mad King's next demand, that he surrender his wards, Robert and Eddard, to the crown. But Jon Arryn refused. Instead, he raised the banners of House Arryn in open rebellion. Robert Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, and Eddard Stark, now Lord of Winterfell, joined him. Across the Seven Kingdoms, lords and knights faced a choice: to stand with the Mad King and his dragon's blood, or to rise with the rebels in defiance of tyranny. The die had been cast. Westeros was at war. The rebellion begins. Battles and betrayals. The realm divides. When Jon Arryn unfurled his banners in defiance of King Aerys, the realm fractured. For the first time in centuries, the Iron Throne faced open rebellion not from a single lord, but from an alliance of houses: the Starks of the north, the Arryns of the Vale, and the Baratheons of Storm's End. Robert Baratheon, larger than life, declared that the crown prince had stolen his betrothed. He swore vengeance upon Rhaegar and pledged to take his throne. His war cry spread quickly, and many lords who had long suffered under Aerys' cruelty flocked to his cause. Yet the Targaryens were not without allies. House Martell of Dorne stood firmly with Princess Elia and her children, who carried the blood of the dragon. House Tyrell of the Reach, vast and wealthy, declared for the king. And most importantly, the great House Lannister of Casterly Rock, though at first silent, waited, watching carefully, ready to choose the side most likely to win. Westeros was split, not just by politics, but by blood and loyalty. Friendships crumbled. Brothers found themselves on opposite sides of the battlefield. The drums of war thundered across the land. Robert's flight and first battles. Robert Baratheon's defiance made him a marked man. The crown declared him outlaw, and loyalist forces hunted him across the Stormlands. At Gulltown, Robert attempted to rally support, but was met with defeat. Wounded, he narrowly escaped, carried to safety by loyal companions. Yet Robert's spirit was unbroken. He returned to his people, calling his banners from Storm's End. His booming laugh and boundless courage inspired his men. To them, Robert was not just a lord, but a warrior who would fight in the shield wall alongside them. He swung his mighty warhammer with ferocity unmatched, a weapon that would become the symbol of his rebellion. Meanwhile, Eddard Stark marched south from Winterfell, bringing the hardened men of the north. Together with Jon Arryn's hosts of the Vale, the rebels forged a three-pronged alliance. Each man was bound not only by oath, but by something deeper: the memory of what Aerys had done to Rickard and Brandon Stark. the Siege of Storm's End. As Robert marched, the Loyalists struck back. House Tyrell gathered its vast armies and besieged Robert's ancestral seat of Storm's End. The towering fortress stood defiant, but its people starved as the Reachmen encircled its walls. Inside, the young Stannis Baratheon held command. Day after day, his men dwindled, their bellies empty, their strength fading. Yet Stannis refused to yield. He hunted foraging animals, even eating rats to sustain the garrison. His iron will kept Storm's End standing, denying the Loyalists a victory that could have crushed Robert's cause. Outside, the Tyrell banners fluttered. Inside, hunger gnawed, but the castle did not fall. And in its endurance, Storm's End became a symbol of the rebels' unbreakable spirit. The Battle of Summerhall, while Storm's End held, Robert sought to break the Loyalists in open battle. At Summerhall, beneath the ruins of the once great Targaryen palace, Robert's forces clashed with the armies of the Crown. Steel rang, shields splintered, and blood soaked the ground where once kings had walked. Robert himself led the charge, wielding his warhammer like the wrath of the gods. His presence turned fear into fire within his men. They shouted his name as they pushed back the Loyalists, their courage swelling with every swing of his hammer. The battle was fierce, but the rebels prevailed. Word spread across Westeros. Robert Baratheon had struck a mighty blow against the dragon. And with every victory, more lords began to whisper that perhaps the stag might triumph where others had failed. A war of shifting loyalties, yet victory was never assured. In the Riverlands, Lord Hoster Tully joined the rebels, sealing alliances with marriages. Eddard Stark to Catelyn Tully, and Jon Arryn to Hoster's daughter Lysa. These bonds strengthened the rebel cause, weaving blood and loyalty together. But every gain was met with danger. Rhaegar Targaryen had vanished after Lyanna's abduction, gathering his strength and preparing his return. The Loyalist armies, though beaten in skirmishes, still held great numbers. And the Mad King, increasingly unstable, unleashed terror upon those he deemed disloyal. Aerys ordered executions, demanded wildfire be stockpiled in secret, and placed his trust in the infamous pyromancers. His reign of fire loomed, threatening to consume the very city he ruled. Meanwhile, the Kingsguard, the finest knights in Westeros, remained loyal to the Targaryen bloodline. Men like Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, and Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, swore their vows not to the realm, but to the crown. As long as they stood, the dragon still had claws. The turning point, the Battle of Ashford. At Ashford, the rebels faced another trial by fire. Loyalist forces, determined to crush Robert once and for all, gathered in strength. Outnumbered and weary, the rebels prepared for what seemed a desperate struggle. Once again, Robert's valor carried the day. In the thick of combat, he sought out the fiercest foes, his hammer breaking through steel and bone alike. Men who fought beside him told tales of a lord touched by the warrior himself, a man who laughed in the face of death. Though costly, Ashford was another rebel victory, and with it came momentum. Across the Riverlands, the banners of the Stag, the Direwolf, and the Falcon spread like wildfire, rallying smaller houses to the cause. The prince returns, but even as Robert's legend grew, a shadow returned to the field. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, absent for much of the war, emerged at last. Clad in black armor adorned with rubies, the Silver Prince took command of the Loyalist forces. Rhaegar was no madman like his father. He was calm, deliberate, and determined to end the war swiftly. He rallied the crown's forces, gathering strength for a final confrontation that would decide the fate of Westeros. The stage was set for the war's greatest battle, a clash upon the banks of the Trident, where the hammer and the dragon would meet. The Battle of the Trident and the Fall of King's Landing. The road to the Trident. By now, Robert Baratheon had become a legend in his own time. Lords and small folk alike whispered of the giant with the warhammer who struck fear into the hearts of the dragon's children. But Robert's path to victory would not be simple. Across the fields of the Riverlands, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen marshaled the forces of the Iron Throne with a calm precision born of years of training and strategy. Rhaegar was not just a warrior. He was a commander who understood the art of war. Every move he made was calculated, every position fortified. Yet for all his brilliance, he underestimated one thing: Robert's rage. Fueled by love, loss, and the desire for vengeance, Robert's fury burned brighter than any tactic or formation. Both armies gathered along the broad river known as the Trident, a place where the land split into 3 streams before flowing into the sea. It would become the site of a battle remembered for centuries, the decisive clash that would either crush the rebellion or end the Targaryen dynasty forever. Clash of Titans? The battle began at dawn, mist rising from the river, banners flapping in the chill morning wind. Robert's forces charged, the sound of hooves and armor like thunder across the plains. Rhaegar, atop his great destrier, met them in the center with a force equal in strength and skill. The river itself became a treacherous obstacle. Horses stumbled in the shallows, and soldiers slipped into the icy current. Yet neither side yielded. Steel met steel, shields splintered, and the cries of men echoed across the fields. Robert fought at the forefront, swinging his warhammer with devastating force. Men fell before him like wheat beneath the scythe. On the other side, Rhaegar's swordsmanship was unmatched. He cut down knights and commanders alike, moving with a grace and speed that belied his size. Those who saw him later would swear he was almost untouchable, a storm made flesh. But even Rhaegar could not withstand the fury of Robert at full charge. In the chaos, the two clashed. Warhammer met sword, and the earth itself seemed to shudder beneath their blows. It was said that Robert's strike shattered Rhaegar's guard, and with one swing, he felled the prince who had haunted the rebellion from the first days. With Rhaegar's death, the Targaryen forces broke. Some fled into the countryside, others surrendered, and the rebellion's victory at the Trident became a turning point that no lord in Westeros would ever forget. March on King's Landing. The war was far from over. The Mad King, Aerys II, still held the capital, King's Landing, and the royal city was heavily fortified. Loyalists poured in from the south, bolstered by House Lannister and remnants of the royal army. The city's streets would become the stage for the final act of Robert's rebellion. Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, made a pivotal decision. Though sworn to the crown, he marched his forces to King's Landing under a flag of deceit. Instead of siding openly with Aerys, he secretly plotted to betray the king, a move that would change the course of the rebellion. Within the city, Aerys grew ever more paranoid. He commanded his pyromancers to prepare caches of wildfire beneath the Red Keep, promising to burn King's Landing to ash rather than surrender. He even taunted those who approached, declaring that when the city burned, every rebel and every loyalist would perish in fire and blood. The sack of King's Landing, Robert's army, joined by the Northern and Vale forces, reached King's Landing and laid siege. Fighting raged in the streets, and the city's population endured terror beyond imagination. The final blow came not from Robert's men alone, but from Tywin Lannister's betrayal. Under the cover of night, Lannister forces entered the city, opening the gates to the rebels. Aerys' pyromancers were discovered plotting, and in the chaos, the Mad King himself was slain. Legend says he was stabbed by Jaime Lannister, one of his own Kingsguard, ending a reign of terror in a single brutal act. Robert Baratheon entered the Red Keep and took his place as the new king. The banners of House Baratheon rose over the Iron Throne, and the dynasty of Aegon the Conqueror was no more. For the first time in nearly 300 years, the Targaryens were exiled, their dragons gone, their power shattered. The aftermath and the price of victory, The rebellion left scars that would linger for generations. Thousands had died, soldiers, peasants, and innocents alike. Cities were burned, lands ravaged, and old alliances broken forever. Robert married Lyanna Stark, fulfilling the promise that had ignited the rebellion, but tragedy struck soon after. Lyanna died under mysterious circumstances, giving birth to a son, the future king who would carry the Stark blood through the veins of the Targaryen line. The new king, Robert Baratheon, ruled with strength, but not always with wisdom. His reign was marked by both stability and tension, for the wounds of rebellion never fully healed. The great houses remained wary, and whispers of the dragon's return began almost immediately. Yet despite the costs, Robert's rebellion achieved what it set out to do. It ended the tyranny of a mad king, freed Westeros from the shadow of fire and paranoia, and reshaped the political landscape forever. The Seven Kingdoms would never be the same. The rebellion's legacy, the Stag's rule, and the Targaryens in exile. The dawn after the fire, with King Aerys 2 dead and King's Landing under rebel control. Westeros faced a fragile peace. The war had ended, but its echoes reverberated across the Seven Kingdoms. The survivors, both noble and common, emerged from the shadow of fire and steel to survey the new order. Robert Baratheon, now crowned king, took his place upon the Iron Throne. His marriage to Lyanna Stark, though brief, symbolized the bond that had fueled the rebellion. To many, Robert's ascension promised justice, vengeance for the dead, and a brighter future. Yet the reality of ruling proved more complex than swinging a warhammer on the battlefield. The price of war, Robert's rebellion had been victorious, but victory came at a terrible cost. Tens of thousands of men had died. Northern infantry, Stormlander knights, Vale archers, and countless others swept up in the tide of war. Entire villages had been destroyed, fields left fallow, and cities scarred by siege and fire. The Riverlands, in particular, bore the brunt of the conflict, its lands repeatedly fought over by both rebel and loyalist armies. Even among the victors, grief was constant. Eddard Stark returned to Winterfell with heavy heart, mourning his sister Lyanna's death and the many Stark soldiers lost. Jon Arryn, the Lord of the Arryn mentor to both Robert and Eddard, saw the Vale scarred by campaigns and the loyalties of his bannermen tested to the breaking point. Robert himself struggled with personal demons. He had achieved vengeance against Rhaegar and justice for his lost love. Yet the crown demanded more than war. It demanded rule, diplomacy, and restraint. Though he was a hero in the eyes of many, Robert's temperament, impulsive and passionate, would sometimes clash with the burdens of kingship. The fall of the Targaryens. The surviving Targaryens were few. Queen Rhaella and her young son, Aegon, escaped across the narrow sea to Dragonstone, marking the beginning of the Targaryens in exile. Princess Elia Martell and her children, tragically caught in the aftermath of the sack of King's Landing, became victims of the brutal politics that followed the rebellion. The dragons themselves, long thought extinct, were gone. With Rhaegar slain and the Targaryens scattered, the Age of Dragons ended. The Iron Throne was now firmly in the hands of a mortal king, and for the first time in centuries, Westeros would live without the fear of dragonfire shaping the destiny of its people. Robert's rule and the seeds of future conflict, Robert Baratheon's reign, was hailed as a new era. But the foundations of peace were uneasy. Houses that had suffered in the war, such as the Starks and Arryns, bore lingering resentments, and old loyalties and rivalries simmered beneath the surface. The North, proud and independent, never fully trusted the Iron Throne, while the Riverlands, devastated by repeated campaigns, struggled to rebuild. Political marriages, alliances, and promises shaped Robert's court, yet cracks were inevitable. His reliance on old friends like Eddard Stark to govern wisely, coupled with his own indulgence in wine, feasts, and revelry, left room for intrigue and ambition to take root. The rebellion had solved the immediate crisis of tyranny, but it could not erase the ambitions, rivalries, and grudges that had always defined Westeros. The legacy of the rebellion. Robert's rebellion reshaped history. It ended a dynasty that had ruled for nearly 300 years. It elevated a new king, forged alliances between great houses, and set the stage for the next era of Westerosi politics. It proved that even a mad king, armed with dragons and fear, could be overthrown by determination, courage, and the bonds of loyalty. Yet the rebellion also left enduring scars. It demonstrated the fragility of power, reminding all lords that even dragons could fall. It showed the devastating human cost of war, where even victory could not erase grief. And it sowed the seeds of future strife, as the descendants of those who fought would later clash over the throne and the legacy of the dragons. In the end, Robert Baratheon's hammer had toppled a dynasty, but the weight of history and prophecy would never let the Seven Kingdoms rest. The story of Robert's rebellion, its heroes, its tragedies, and its triumphs, would echo through the halls of Westeros for generations to come. And so ends the story of Robert's rebellion, the war that ended Targaryen rule and reshaped the Seven Kingdoms. But the legacy of dragons, honor, and vengeance would continue to echo for decades, shaping the fate of kings and commoners alike. If you've enjoyed this journey through history, strike your own hammer and hit that like button. Comment with your favorite hero or battle, and subscribe to our channel for more epic tales from Westeros. Until next time, may your banners fly high and your dragons roar in legend.